for being here. Thank you very much. This is a very special day. Today in the US, we're celebrating the Memorial Day. So congratulations to everybody listening to us in America. And in Mexico, today, May 25th, as it has been for 100 or plus years, we're celebrating the Accountants Day. So everybody, colleagues of accountants in Mexico, warm hug to celebrate.
Congratulations, Mauricio.
Thank you, Carlos. And we're also very happy because we have the opportunity to address to you today. Our guests are mainly clients who join us to go over some important information. But first, allow me to introduce you to Carlos. Carlos, on top of being a good friend, is a really close business partner to our firm. He interacts with us with many of our clients. We have common clients, and it's an excellent profession in legal advisory for corporations. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. Hello, I'm Carlos Niño. I'm founding partner at TMC Legal. We are a boutique law firm established in Mexico City 20 years ago, and we are mainly focused on advising foreign corporations doing business in Mexico. Among other practice, we do provide them with the specific advisory on some tax aspects.
Thank you, Carlos. And well, the mastermind behind all of this event today, and your friend as well. As for myself, I can say that I have 10 years being part of this video family, very proud of it, and 20 plus years in the accounting advisory service line. So again, we are very honored to have you here. These contents today are intended for you, please, to understand some cultural situations, some important information that we need to highlight, some tips we need to share with you on how to tackle a tax audit, how to become a successful taxpayer being audited. And for that end, we have put together some information that has to do with legal advisory, tax contents in the tax provisions, and this is divided in 5 chapters for today. We're planning to have a 70-minute session of us speaking, taking over the slides, and after that, an extra 20 minutes for you to give us your input on questions, comments, and whatever criticism is more than welcome. We're happy to be with you here, and we want to make you get the best of today's time invested. So, for today's content, 5 chapters. First, Carlos is going to help us understand what's presumption. From a legal standpoint, what does presumption mean? Second item in the list, what are fictions from a legal standpoint? How and why and when do we face ourselves in the moment tax authorities create fictional scenarios, create fictional conclusions of other type of legal events? The third subject today is what is the valid evidence, what is the comprehensive set of documents, information, explanations, which are very important for this end, to share with the tax authorities in the event of an audit, and also additionally, if we're to face trial. The fourth item on the list, we have to discuss what is the role of a public, notary public, what do they do, how do they help companies, what's their input, and also in a joint manner to understand a new Supreme Court criteria. Carlos will be explaining us from, of course, the role and the relevance of these criteria. And the last item is a recent concept. It is now placed in the Mexican law. Mexico goes by the written law. And now we have a legal definition on business reason. So without further ado, please let's go to it. Carlos, I leave you with item number 1 on the list.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. Well, first of all, I would like to give you a general explanation of what presumption is under a legal point of view. In the law of evidence, a presumption of a particular fact can be made without the aid of proof in some situations. The invocation of a presumption shifts the burden of the proof to the counterpart in the justice trial. There are several categories on how presumption can be understood. However, the most important ones are the reputable presumption, which is when the fact is assumed true until the counterpart proves otherwise, such as the presumption of innocence or the conclusive or irrefutable type of presumption, which cannot be refuted in any case, such as the defense on infancy in some legal systems. Of course, there are other type of presumptions, such as the presumptions without basic facts or the presumptions with basic facts. Mauricio.
Thank you, Carlos. I think it's worth to mention some examples from the local point of view. Domestically, Mexico considers that whatever Mexican national is born and eventually registered before the tax authority is to be considered a tax Mexican resident. So all Mexicans are assumed Mexican residents. And the law, I remember the law also contains the unless proven otherwise, which is, it happens when a person has double nationality or resigns to the Mexican to become national of another country.
That is correct, Mauricio.
I think I got the idea.
You are correct, Mauricio.
Thanks. Okay, moving to the second item, what is a fiction? And I think the example is the best explanation, or at least that's the way I better understand. The first example we want to make is, on the cases the tax authority has the ability, the legal entitlement to translate or to convert a situation, a legal situation, into a different one. And also, when a legal event takes place, what is to be understood? Example, the fictional denial, it's a resource the legal authority holds contained in the Federal Fiscal Code, which means whatever taxpayer needs a response, places a question, places a consultation implicated on a binary system of you can get a yes or you can get a no. Whenever delivered in the proper channels and having the proper formalities fulfilled, in written, in the proper clerk or window, or through the internet, and following all the applicable formalities, after the term of 3 months, no response from the authority implies a no. Whatever question was asked, whatever request was placed, it's been denied. Only after 3 months, so that's an interpretation of the silence of the authority. That's one example. You can give us a few further?
Yes, of course. I would like to explain to you some other type of fiction. In this case, the fictional or fake dividend. It's when many companies, they take the profits away from any company by not declaring dividends and sharing it to the original shareholders. It's, as an example, when they pay interest to the shareholders as individuals, or when they grant loans to the shareholders that in many cases never gets paid back. Other are the non-deductible amount of cash flow, or when the company performs unreported purchases. No less important is when the Mexican tax authority declares a profit value upon prior calculation made by them. And finally, another example is when this profit gets declared as an adjustment resulted from a transfer pricing audit or analysis.
Yes, which is a common subject in the type of clients that you and I take the opportunity and the honor to address our services to. International companies have a lot of saying in transfer pricing, but in terms of fiction, it is worth to mention that any of these 6 references you made, Carlos, imply consequences to the taxpayer itself, the corporation in Mexico, as any of these scenarios imply higher taxation calculated by the authorities, plus it backfires a consequence to the shareholders. So that's why fake dividends are to be something to be really careful about.
Yes, because this could trigger an audit to the shareholders on a direct manner. So we must be very cautious about this type of transactions.
Indeed. And a third type of fiction, I think it's worth to mention just to wrap it up in terms of what fiction implies. Also on taxes, but having to do, in the particular case, of Social Security contributions. Social Security law considers that those contractors, those outsourcing services companies, also known as employment labor corporations, contractors to be specific, those firms are to be deemed, well, they are typically the employer, and they are to carry out whatever and all of the applicable formalities and all the obligations of an employer, which are to guarantee all the benefits, all the applicable wages and payable obligations, provide health coverage, training, the tools, all those obligations that by law, by labor law, are considered to be given by an employer. Yet, from a social security agency standpoint, they can turn, if any of these obligations, any of this coverage is not fulfilled, they can turn the client of that outsourcing company, the user of the manpower, sorry to give brands, but I didn't mean it that way, the benefit of that service is to be also considered the employer and be responsible of the contributions that were not duly or timely covered by the outsourcing company. So this is a way to avoid fraudulent performance. This is a way to protect the employees to have a full coverage either by the outsourcing company, the contractor, or the clients. So we must be very careful whenever we face a situation in which it is a reputable outsourcing company, the one offering the services. You have a comment here?
Yeah, that is correct. Many of our international clients, they must be very cautious when they engage with the services of these outsourcing companies or employer of the record to make sure that they are a reliable company and to, in a certain way, bulletproof that they will not be suffering from fiscal contingency in the future as a result of any wrongdoing by these sort of companies, which is customary in Mexico.
Yes, Carlos. And one last comment on this social security issue, because we've seen it in the practice. You have a company hiring an outsourcing contractor, and they place a clause in which they say no lack of responsibility from the outsourcing, the true employer will be escalated into the company that is hiring this outsourcing. So the end beneficiary of these services under that clause is not to worry because of that. Well, sorry to say that these considerations in the Social Security law makes as if that clause didn't exist. They are to escalate it no matter whatever wording you have in a contract.
Fully agree.
I just wanted to make that addition, please.
No problem.
Okay.
At this moment, I would like to explain to you what would happen if it was the taxpayer instead of the authority creating fictional scenarios. Article 109 of the Federal Fiscal Code says that the taxpayer will be accused with the same sanctions as with tax fraud when they simulate one or more activities that could create an improper benefit in favor of the taxpayer and against the national treasury. This is something very sensitive, and this could even create some criminal consequences against the taxpayer and to be taken care of by our clients.
Yes, Carlos, I think this particular statement from the Federal Tax Code implies the strong arm of the law. By making reviews and by finding a taxpayer to perform a simulation to his or her benefit, we have a very critical situation in front of us, and it is our interest and our concern, of course, as advisors, to have the client properly coached, properly guided, not to fall into these situations, because simulations is prosecuted. It can trigger both economical and personal consequences that we don't want for any of our clients to face at any point in time.
That is correct, Mauricio.
Okay, so after considering those two subjects, presumption and fictions, we're now moving into the description of what is a typical audit. And this slide here has to do with the historical background. Not much ago, let's say 7 years at the top, and even before the time, you could not easily but fairly would be able to outcome in a good position a tax audit. If you ended up being reviewed by certain tax, certain contribution, certain period of time, all you had to do in your filing, in most cases, was these four items that are on the screen. Mexico is a lot of formalities. We do the accounting based on invoices that comply the legal terms of how an invoice is to be issued. So by having the invoice, you have almost half of the homework accomplished. The second item in the list is evidence of the payment of that particular invoice or any other transactions. Banking system, as I put it here under the code, inside the quotations, to be on the grid. Payments are to be traceable. Cash is not a friendly thing to use in terms of taxation to provide evidence. So if you're able to demonstrate the source of a wire transfer and the destination, you're in a better position. The third item on this list is a proper accounting entry. US GAAP or Mexican GAAP or international accounting standards fulfillment and observation of each and every transaction in this audit. So as long as the accounting was done properly, the VAT was properly disclosed and allocated in the applicable asset accounts in the purchase of goods, all the registrations you had to be properly booked, then you were in a good and safe position. And the other half of the homework was to truly back up in an executed agreement. Not only for contracts, not only for services, that is, not only for intangible, but also for tangible assets. If you have the purchases of items, it was worth to have purchase order, quotations, all the background, all the paperwork of that particular transaction. It is by far most important to have for all of the relevant tax deductible concepts, purchase of goods, service, contractors, employments, to have the executed agreement valid throughout the time and the term of the audit, of course, to be the document that relies all the description of whatever is being billed in the item number 1 here, the tax compliant invoice. That was back in history, but things have been narrowed down, Carlos.
Yes, and before we analyze the current changes to the applicable laws that have been giving more elements to the tax authorities to begin with more aggressive audits, I would like to explain to you a bit of the cultural background on why the tax audits in Mexico are more difficult and the taxpayers gets forced to provide these auditors with more elements to face those reviews on its accounting books. This is because Mexico is unfortunately one of the countries with the lowest tax collection ratio in comparison with its GDP. Mexico, as well as a member of the OCDE, is the last on the list talking about tax collection. The base erosion profit shifting in Mexico is unfortunately like a domestic sport. And there is a considerable size of the informal economy sector in Mexico, which rise up to 50% approximately, and we don't know how this will increase as a result of COVID-19. No less important is that Mexico used to be an oil-dependent country, and now the income resulted from the oil industry gets lower and lower every time. And this becomes the foundations for the tax authority to go after the taxpayers to try to collect the most taxes as possible, Mauricio.
Yes, it's a commonly known feeling among the business and the people who try to subsist and continue the business, the employment source, that tax authorities have been growing eager in demands, in exquisiteness of formalities, and it is for that reason that we find it necessary to provide this series of tips and references for you to have in the future, knock on wood, but if we face tax review, the better position to face these situations. The tax authorities are even with higher hunger nowadays, and it is why we need to address this with you. Now, taking as an example a tax authority document requesting information to carry out an audit, we did this diagram is divided in the following three slides, this one being the first, for cash deposited in bank accounts. We typically find that tax authorities copy and paste a commonly shared wording among them, and this is what they often request. Considering that bank accounts show revenue, typically, they are to find it necessary, taxpayer, to disclose on each of these categories how to document, and let me take over the first one. If it belongs to a loan, that of course is not revenue. So accounting entries are to be exhibited. Loan agreements, amortization tables, promissory notes, in original, they need to find out this is an authentic loan or a loan repayment to properly document that transaction and not to be deemed taxable revenue. What can you tell us, Carlos, please, about equity contributions and how to document them?
Yes, of course. Well, according to the Mexican Corporations Act, any corporation must meet with some specific law provisions, which means that they must have its corporate books, its partners meeting, the titles of the shares, all the documents associated with the corporate legal structure of the company. In specific, and in this case, the shareholders minutes meeting that formalized the equity contributions together with the notices before the Foreign Investment National Registry, and that the company did inform the name and the tax ID of the shareholders when applicable, Mauricio.
Thank you, Carlos. So whenever a corporation is receiving a cash paid equity increase, you should go one by one with all of these documents. Of course, that's Carlos' specialty, so I take this opportunity to let you know that Carlos has been really helpful with the clients we share in putting this up to date for whatever, to be compliant, but whatever possibility of have this to be reviewed by the authorities. Thank you. Another subjects that have to do with cash are temporary investments done in with a stock exchange broker. Well, on your right, you may see on the third paragraph that you need to exhibit accounting entries, and among other, they are openly facultative and able to ask for even further. But they need to see executed agreements, sufficient evidence of each and all the cash deposits, the confirmations done by email. Everything should be placed in written and kept up to 5 years. 5 years is the statute of limitations. So whenever a taxpayer is translating, well, that has to do with the fourth category, translating Mexican currency into US dollars or whatever other world currency, to hold enough backup to demonstrate in a worksheet how do they match the inflow and outflow from one of your each accounts. And that sort of stuff is paperwork, of course, but this builds up a case. This is very important to have in proper filing for the chances of being audited. I think we can move to the next one, Carlos. Okay, for those clients of ours who perform importation of goods, we can all be in agreement that this is the main expense, or the main cost of goods, of course, is the main item in an annual tax return. For that end, it is highly relevant to protect and to properly document foreign trading transactions. And also, Carlos, I think it's worth to outline how often does the tax authority expect to be described with, because they're also needing explanations. How is the logistic being managed?
Yes, Mauricio. aside from the obligations set forth in the Mexican customs law regarding with the type of documents that we must have in our files associated with our imports and exports, in some sort of tax audits, which could be for income tax purposes, as an example. Sometimes the authority, they request us with specific information to make sure that our logistics procedures make sense under a business point of view. This might sound kind of illogical, but under the square-minded operative system of the tax auditors, they all assume that any company, and mostly a foreign company with a Mexican subsidiary which performs imports and exports, they must have big warehouses either in the US and in Mexico, a large number of trucks, a lot of people working at the offices. And they don't understand that now in the 21st century, many of these companies, they do perform a very cost-efficient logistic way of handling its business. When they ship everything through FedEx, and that the goods arrive directly to, let's call, Amazon Central Warehouse in Mexico, so that these companies, they don't even need a warehouse, they don't even need to have trucks or a delivery method, because everything has been done in a very efficient manner. So by providing the authority in the proper time during an audit of all these sort of information and evidence, it will make them understand how we perform, and as a result of that, they will be more friendly with us because they will be aware of how we perform our logistics and our business as well, Mauricio.
Yes, I'm sure that this can come concerning in the way that a company based on an efficient logistics platform is forced, in a way of saying it, is forced to share all its logistics strategy. I can read a little here of they're expecting to see freight contracts, rail car lease, demurrage, all the terms, conditions, all the prices, all the agreements they hold with all the chain of logistics. It is mandatory to demonstrate it. We'll talk about it later, but it can be a sensible set of information that not everybody will be comfortable in sharing. I agree with you. Okay, please. So we've been speaking about cash deposits. We've also been speaking about importation of goods. In a nutshell, only documents, or better said, it is not only documents what they're expecting to see, they also need explanations. They need to be enlightened with how the business is being run. So not only for logistics, for all the methodology, all the business plan, they request a business workflow. They ask for a highly detailed explanation of the business model carried out. Which transaction are the company involved with, which are taxed in full, partially, or exempt. This sounds a reiteration, because antivirus is running now. This might sound like a reiteration because there is information that is already shared, presented, and filed, and yet we find ourselves in the position to explain all over again what might be looked as evident, yet they are expecting it. They need description of each and all the activities performed in the business, step by step, from the beginning, purchase of raw materials perhaps, to the final steps. Sorry about this. Some software is messing up here. Fantasmas. Where
year.
Sorry for the interruption. Some glitch messed up with my computer, but we're back on track now. Thank you. Like I was saying, all the business workflow, all the business strategy, and Carlos, I don't know if you have seen this, but sometimes they are asking for even copyright protected information, secrecy of industrial nature, all the guts and all the more private and intimate information of a company is to be exhibited here. What have you seen, or what do you feel? How do you feel about it?
Well, it is quite sensitive for the companies to be aware of which type of information they disclose to the tax authorities to explain to them your business model. We must be very cautious on what we provide them unless they specifically ask this by written to us. And in this case, it is good that we collaborate with them, but by making sure that we don't give them the formula of our business at full.
Awesome, Carlos, thank you. Well, that covers it for what we have suffered today as a typical tax request or a tax auditor placing a request of documents and information. Now I have a question to you, Carlos. Are they really entitled to ask for so much information? Or does it say that they are really able to obtain all of this?
I do believe so, and even more considering what the Article 33 of the Federal Tax Code ruling says, Mauricio.
Yes, it was, I believe, in year 2015 that this wording came into part of the rulings of the Federal Tax Code. And in Article 33, we have a list of 9 paragraphs stating what should the contents of a typical accounting in a taxpayer comprehensive point of view should be. This list of 9 items is more like a checklist of all the contents, and a set of accounting should be complete and, of course, made available for the tax authority whenever they request it. And just a few highlights. We have here in the screen paragraph 5 that states taxpayers are to hold available all stock titles, share titles, certificates, and any type of titles of credit in which the taxpayers hold any role within. Have you had experience here, Carlos, on a tax review about this matter?
Yes, of course. This is quite often, let's say, for investment funds, when they are owners of stock titles, or they invest in the Mexican or any stock exchange located abroad, they must record them as part of its accounting, or when they own promissory notes or they own debt from other companies.
Yes, and this is something that will be reiterated eventually in the examples we're to provide, but often the clients we have the opportunity and the honor to assist have a lot of loans coming in, and the proper documentation is key. It says right here, not only it's a good idea of the tax authorities to request for that information, it is a mandatory issue to have it available whenever a review. Let me just read the bottom part. 9 listing paragraphs, detailed one by one, the documents on ordinary taxpayers must hold available. What about the most disturbing one? We have made an outline on paragraph 8 of this very same Article 33 of the Federal Fiscal Code rulings, because we find it disturbing in a way that it's highly demanding of information support of the totality of transactions. Here we find that they're expecting all transactions to be contained in the accounting, to be provided with proper registration, and to have all paperwork available, complete, comprehensive, self-explanatory, not of the main transactions. I mean, this is somehow surprising. They expect to see even the smallest commission charged by the bank to have its proper paperwork, because they are asking for the totality.
I agree with you. This paragraph of the Federal Tax Code rulings is the one which grants the authority the let's say, the weapon to attack the taxpayers and ask for all the evidence associated with its operations in Mexico whenever an audit comes.
Yes, and just to be fair in the way that some entrepreneurs, some business people would say, hey, address to the main issues, make a sample, go for some methodology on audit to assure that a percentage of the transactions give you the certainty you're after. In the case of tax audits, they are to fulfill the totality. They have lots of time, oftenly starting an audit, and they are asking for the information rather than mining themselves for the paperwork. So again, these all are tips to be provided to you in the way of being the most prepared in the event of an audit. Let me grab my notes over here. Well, and just to put it in the most illustrative way possible, we have placed a set of 3 examples we wish to develop here to comment a little, because it is what we typically find ourselves when we are interacting with our clients and we are providing advisory, that it is necessary to highlight the number of consequences of these situations we are graphically describing here. Carlos, would you take number 1?
Yes, of course, Mauricio. Yeah, basically, the typical example in Mexico, and this is quite customary, is when a Mexican corporation or a Mexican subsidiary of a foreign entity increase its contributed equity value, but they did not meet with the basic provisions as established by the Mexican Corporations Act, which means that they needed to formalize the partners' minutes meeting, approving this increase on the equity value, to notarize it when applicable, to record it on the corporate books, to issue the titles of shares accordingly, and to record this change before the Foreign Investment National Registry Office. Many companies, they don't have the culture of having its corporate books on a proper and current manner together with its local advisors in our country. Therefore, what we always suggest is that you engage with your corporate lawyers and make sure that this is okay at full.
Yes, Carlos, that, and on top of that, I think it's worth we can give our guests here a small piece of advice. You know, there's tax domicile hosting, which happens to be the same as corporate domicile. So whenever a shareholders meeting minute takes place, it is said in written that it takes place in the tax domicile or the corporate address of the corporation. It makes sense, in addition to what is stated on the document, to consider making pictures of the attendees, the people who took the place of the secretary, the underwriter, and all the other members mentioned in representation of the shareholders in that shareholders meeting. So that you have, in addition to the paper written of who was there, pictures of the people and the facade of the building or the entrance of the office working as additional evidence. This, in our experience, has proven effective when making it evident to the tax authorities that the tax domicile is truly where it's stated to be.
That is correct. The Mexican Corporations Act doesn't allow partners' minutes meeting to be celebrated on a remotely manner. Therefore, you are used to signing proxies to your representatives for them to formalize them in Mexico. So what we do suggest, as Mauricio just mentioned, is that we take some pictures when the people is signing those partners' minutes meeting in the same office where the fiscal domicile is located, so that we can prove before the tax authorities that in fact the company is there, it really exists, and that way we can easily challenge any type of question from inside that why the shareholders are not where the company is, because it might sound quite absurd but sometimes the tax auditors in Mexico are looking for the shareholders when they are located in Europe or in France or in other countries.
Indeed, Carlos. Moving to the second and third examples, allow me to try and explain it. These are situations, in case of example number 2, when a Mexican company has foreign shareholders, and one of those is also a service contractor. This service contractor now and then sends over a management fee invoice. The corporate office, the headquarters, has only provided a very basic invoice, and that's all there is. The accounting entry, of course, but we have nothing else backing up the evidence, the description, the nature of the service. So, in addition to considering drafting an agreement, and Carlos will be able to give us some highlights on how to think on that format of agreement, we definitely need that deliverables, reports, timing, logs, and other sort of evidence supporting the services being recharged to the Mexican subsidiary are to be properly filed. It's a story, of course, it's tedious, and yet it can be a saving matter if the expense backing up this management fee invoice is it's somehow an important amount. Supporting the documentation, as previously explained, is key. So let us all start by doing some logs, setting up together some history on what services are being driven through that management fee invoice. It's worth the time spent to have that properly set up. In the third example, we have a typical situation with brand new companies setting up in Mexico. Now, if a new company is set, it will definitely need to cover initial expenses, and the revenues just haven't come yet. So what do we see? That the shareholders or a third party within the consortium sends over money in the form of a funding. Well, we have some comings and goings with the new clients in terms of understanding these monies to be labeled how, often loan or other times as shareholders' equity contribution. When we're specifically talking about a loan, it's not enough to say label it as a loan. We also need the corporation to set up a fair market value in terms and conditions contract, a promissory note that meets with what is applicable in the market. So in the example I was providing here, it was related to a foreign entity granted a loan 2 years ago, and yet today, no evidence of a printed contract is being issued. We need to see a document that has to show who is who representing each party, the creditor and the debtor, who is signing, of course. It needs to be signed, executed, or otherwise we will have only a draft. And you need to show terms, warranties, an interest rate, and of course, all the considerations applicable of a typical loan contract to be given within fair market value conditions. Sorry, I got distracted with the screen.
Now, talking about agreements, same as with common law, in civil law system, the fact of having duly executed agreement for the most relevant transactions of any corporation becomes a must in Mexico. This is something very important because, as we have been mentioning throughout all this presentation, the Mexican tax authorities are very formal oriented when they perform audits. Some of our international clients, when they don't have experience on where or when they begin expanding abroad, they might believe that here in Mexico things might not be quite as strict, tax-wise speaking, like in the States or in Europe. But honestly speaking, the Mexican tax authorities are very aggressive, and they are always looking for the formalities to be accomplished by the taxpayers. Going backwards to what the agreement says, there has been a lot of problems because sometimes the tax authorities has been challenging the validity of the agreements because they are believing that they were printed and signed after the audit began. That is why they began challenging this before federal courts. And on December 19th, the Supreme Court published a jurisprudence where they granted the Mexican tax authority with the benefit of asking the taxpayers for higher formality to prove before them that with enough evidence of the certainty of the date of signing of any document. What does this mean? This means that these documents has to be signed on a way that the authority could accept that they were executed on the time that they were intended to. And the only way that we can meet with such requirement from the tax authorities is upon ratifying those agreements, the most relevant ones. We don't mean that you ratify all of your agreements, but at least the most relevant ones associated with your transactions, either before a certified public broker or a notary public. Under Mexican law system, the certified public broker and the notary public, they have a very strong legal support and recognition. Here, I would like to highlight the contents and the summary of the jurisprudence by the Mexican Supreme Court dated December 31st, 2019, where it confirmed, as I just mentioned before, that the private document must meet with the requirement of a certain date in the case of any review by the tax authorities, Mauricio.
Yes, Carlos, this is very relevant because now it seems like all private documents are not supposed to be private documents or are not anymore to be accepted as such. And I do need to make some criticism. You have heard me before on this particular matter. It is somehow an imposition. So National Supreme Court made a decision to end up any discussion among other lower level courthouses. In terms of taxation, you have the typical applicable coding, the typical applicable set of laws for mercantile situations, civil codes, in which no need to validate and to provide authenticity to a document before a commercial relationship had to do with other formality than being written and perhaps adding up two witnesses for its validation. That made it more than enough to be an executed and valid agreement to be also put in court. So with that intrinsic value of a document, taxpayers were able to defend and to prove that the transactions and documents they were carrying out were authentic, were real, and it was something to be verified with the other party, the service provider, the vendor, whomever. Yet some other courthouses gave it to the Mexican Tax Authority in a way that saying, you're right, it is doubtful, it is conspicuous, it is suspicious to truly accept a document that you don't know if it was backdated, printed 2 hours or 2 weeks ago, and like you said, often being created after the tax audit started. So it is now for taxation, for better protection, that a document, a private document, is raised before a public notary or notary public to have authentical dating. That is, to have accuracy on the date it was issued. So this is the tip we need to provide here to start considering making a specific effort, asking for help with your corporate advisor. Carlos, of course, is here available, to start considering which are the documents that are representing valuable situations, business-wise, to be raised into public documents. And before moving further, I think it's worth to give a second piece of advice, as we did earlier. This is, and I think you should brought it up, but the two-column document of an agreement makes more sense to be created right from the start than asking for a third authorized translator, which can become much more expensive. So this is a saving tip we give you guys.
Yes, of course. What we usually suggest to our clients is whenever they execute intercompany agreements or agreements among cross-border to support cross-border transactions, we always suggest that they get signed in both English and Spanish version in two columns, so that whenever an audit comes, the authority could accept it immediately without asking you to provide them with an official translation of the document, which could create an additional expenditure for the taxpayer, because the Mexican tax authorities, they don't accept documents in other languages rather than in Spanish.
Yes, in Mexico, the official language is Spanish, and the translator will be only those ones holding the patent as per the authorities' permit.
That is correct, Mauricio.
Yeah, so we wanted to give you this, which makes sense, this saving tips. Let's move on, Carlos. Okay, we have now arrived, and we have perfect timing. We have more time for your questions. This is the last item on the agenda today. Where do we find a description of what the concept business reason is and what is the tax authority expecting? I hope we don't get lost in translation and explanations, because it's a new text. We tried our best to make a proper translation, and yet I feel we need to make some elaborations here. As of December 2019, we did not have a written concept. We only had our best intuition, the tax authority's subjective point of view on how transactions were driven and how likely they were accepted as, from a business acumen, a business understanding, they made sense or not to be allowed as tax deductible. Now, with this tax modification, Article 5A in the Federal Fiscal Code, now it is in written, it is black and white. When does the Mexican tax authority is allowed to requalify or relabel a certain transaction? Carlos, would you mind sharing with us your point of view?
Yes, Article 5A of the Federal Tax Code says that any transactions that lack of a business reason and also generate direct or indirect tax reduction shall have the same tax benefits as of those that would have been carried out to obtain the economic benefit reasonably expected by the taxpayer. In a tax audit, the tax authority may presume that those legal acts lacked of business reason based on the facts and circumstances that they analyze, discover, and conclude upon reviewing the taxpayer's information. And this could result into the authority presuming and determining an additional tax burden and applicable fines and penalties against the taxpayer.
In plain English, and we hope that we deliver the message, I think it's worth to make an example of any type of meal, any type of recipe. You know, you need the ingredients. So let us make it very easy. Let's say we are fixing up a Big Mac. So we're in a kitchen inside a McDonald's, and the Big Mac takes buns, meat, but also takes lettuce, tomatoes, mayonnaise, and I don't know what else. Pickles, perhaps. Often people toss them away, but it takes pickles as well. So the way this is written, Carlos, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that now the tax authority is entitled to discard whatever, from their point of view, doesn't make sense from a business reason. To their taste, to their understanding of how the business is driven, only the buns and the meat in the example are the ones that make the hamburger. They are to deem as non-deductible the purchase of the rest of the ingredients. I think, yes, we could be facing at some point some situation of that nature. Sorry to make it so basic in the terms of the example. I think it is the best way to deliver the message, but this is the new faculty. We are to manage properly and demonstrate before the tax authority, we also need the pickles, the mayonnaise, the tomatoes, and the lettuce to set up a full recipe and to be running properly a business.
Yes, Mauricio, and this is something quite important under a corporate point of view. Why? Because it is not forbidden to change your business model or to expand the activities of any of your companies. That is why you must be aware that you should be aligning the legal purpose of your Mexican entity so that whenever you decide to expand or to modify your business model, the legal purpose on your bylaws, it's adapted to that so that though that change cannot be challenged by the tax authorities.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. I think we need to highlight this third piece of advice today. Whenever business models are to be rethought or readdressed, consider reading your bylaws and make sure it contains whatever you're swifting to so that you don't get caught up with these type of situations. Yes. And the last piece of information regarding business reasons is here. We're making a small summary of a huge explanation given on Article 5A because the wording is full of words. So this is the best of the summary we could come up. The tax authority may presume. Again, we started with presumption, and now we're ending up with this presentation with a presumption. So they are allowed to presume, unless proven otherwise, of course, that no business reason exists when the reasonably expected quantifiable economic benefit is less than the tax saving. In other words, you're in the business to make earnings or to cheat taxes, to save taxes. So that's somehow a sensitive yet subjective point of view to qualify transactions. But this is now in written word, so they have it available as a tool for fiscalization. Additionally, the tax authority may presume, unless proven otherwise, that a series of legal acts lack business reason, when the reasonably expected economic benefit may be achieved by means of the performance of a lesser number of legal acts, and the tax effect thereof would have been greatly burdensome. Any reduction, elimination, or temporary deferment of a tax is considered to be a tax saving. In other words, tax solution. So this is truly the hunting thereafter, to detect those transactions that, in the way they see it, and unless proven otherwise, don't really add up value to the business being managed. I hope with the explanation of the Big Mac example, we can make a better case and make it more clear to you. Then again, the tip today for this last item is to make it available to all possible ways to hold enough supporting documentations of what's the reason, what's the strategy, and what's the supporting explanations on how a business is run, so that this situation here doesn't backfire to us.
Yes, and the fact of having tax losses is not illegal per se. However, whenever this begins to happen, we must be aware that now the tax authorities will be researching and questioning why. And that is something that we must be taking care about on a very, very day-by-day scenario.
Yes, Carlos, I can think now of another situation. This was a real thing. It was I cannot disclose the name or the company, but a company making sales in retail with an intended loss. Business reason, they wanted market share. So they penalized their prices, their sale prices. They penalized, of course, the sales margin, and consistently made it over the turn of 3 years. But that gave them what? The product placement of your computer, your elements, your items, being the ones cheaper than the competition. So eventually this paid off. This made a better sales strategy after year number 4. But like you said, having reiteratively and year after year reporting losses can definitely raise the eyebrow of the authorities more than once.
That is correct, Mauricio. I agree with you.
So this is our final slide related to business reason. We hope to transmit the ideas. And now we come to the conclusion of today's input. Here are some final ideas, and I leave it to you first, Carlos.
Yes, as we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the main purpose is to give you very practical tips on how to handle tax audits in the future. Even more considering that our international clients, they have its subsidiaries in Mexico, and we must be aware that it's not only a matter of complying with the accounting, bookkeeping, like in the past. Therefore, we encourage you to double check which are the most relevant documents supporting the transactions in the Mexican market, so that you can have a file in Mexico and in your headquarters offices as well. Everything has to be where the company is located in our country and available for the tax auditors whenever it gets requested by them. No less important is that, as mentioned before, you take into consideration the recommendation of notarizing the most relevant documents associated with your transactions in our country to minimize any type of questioning by the tax authorities as well. To minimize the risk is our main purpose. And Mauricio, would you like to explain a bit about the tax domicile?
Definitely, Carlos, thank you. We have made this effort today, Carlos and myself, on behalf of his firm, TMC Legal and Video, to provide you with some information that it's better assured to have them safe than be sorry. So all of this information, all of these efforts to start making up a solid file would end up in a perfect way by sharing it and having it properly stored in the tax domicile. All the efforts of making it and putting together all documents and all paperwork won't be proven effective unless these are addressed and filed in the tax domicile. Make sure that the documents are either in digital version, properly stored, legible. Some documents are to be kept in original, in hard copy. Those that end up with the stamp of a notary public definitely are only worth if you have the original hard copy. And all the above said paperwork to be properly stored and safely stored in the tax domicile of your company. On the particular case of those foreign trade companies, properly integrate importation and exportation files, have the manifest documents delivered and stored at the location of your tax domicile. We are reiterating, of course, we also mentioned the generality, but in the case of foreign trade companies making imports, often they get stored by the customs broker, by the storage warehouse, yet the information for tax purposes is better and safer if kept in the tax domicile in original. And the last idea, Carlos, if you please.
Yes, and our last suggestion, and we do believe that these merge all of the ideas that we have been sharing with you throughout this presentation, is that the better the files and the strong evidence in documents available, the stronger the base by merit you will have as a taxpayer to face a tax audit and tax litigation should it happens. That will make you feel more comfortable. That will make you feel less nervous of what could happen with you should in case there is any questioning by the tax authorities associated with your operations in our country.
Carlos, that covers it. Thank you for being here with us and helping us deliver this set of messages. I hope that many questions are arising, that we have placed the dot in the I for many questions that our clients might have in the past. Others will come now as new ones. I wish you could give me a high five with your elbow. Well done. Thank you very much. And I am now moving to the Q&A session by pulling out the chat room so I can see what's today for us to deliver. Feel free to type your question in the chat room and I will be able to read it out loud. Here we have the first question for one of our participants. It says, I'm reading it literally. Quote, is that something we must present to the authority in front or wait for the inspection in order to present the document? It is, of course, the strategy addressed today, Carlos, is to have this ready for the event of a request.
That is correct. That is correct.
Not to be openly disclosing and presenting it by one's first attempt, but having it requested and then be ready for it.
You know, during the developing of any tax audit, we will detect how aggressive it can be, and it will give us the idea of how we could manage this. And as Mauricio mentioned, then we will be on the better position to know how much and explanations and documentation we must deliver to them for them to feel confident and clear about our business model and the type of transactions that we do perform.
Well, we're keen to receive your questions. Please keep them coming. Don't be shy. I don't believe we were that clear. Thank you. We have a comment here. Very well explained. Thank you. This is coming in an anonymous basis, so to whomever who placed this comment in Spanish, thank you back. Would you like to grab a chair? Here we have a second question, Carlos, and it comes from a participant called Yvonne. Could you please provide a copy of your presentation plate? Yes, we will ask marketing department to make that available in our website. And of course, everybody can download it. I think it's the best way to tackle this. Again, regarding the presentation, we'll allocate it in the website of BDO Mexico for you to freely download it as many times as you wish. Thank you. You can give it a couple of minutes.
Of course, if you have specific questions for us, you can send us an email to both Mauricio and myself, and we will be glad to help you with whatever doubt you may have.
Here's an interesting question regarding notarization of documents. It says here, quote, for a small company, notarizing all relevant documents is expensive. Are there any alternatives? Would you allow me to take that one?
Yes, sure.
It's very interesting, and yes, we totally get that sense that it is an expensive issue to take all your private documents and turn it into a public document by having a notary public stamping those. Notary publics in Mexico indeed are expensive, yet it is relevant, and Carlos, please correct me if I'm wrong, to know and understand what is that you want from a public notary. Because I've seen that you have the choice of making a public deed, or, on the other side, asking a public notary to ratify the content and the signer's identity. So this second phase is not as expensive when you request that the notary just shares the public faith, they call, in making sure that the contents of the interest of the parties are legal and acceptable, and that the public notary ratifies the will and the identity of each of the signers. This can come cheaper than making a public deed. Would you agree?
Yes, and for small companies, the option of doing this through a certified public broker becomes less costly and with the same legal validity.
So there's a tip, but yet you do need either a public notary or a commercial broker, no?
Certified public broker.
Certified public broker. Thank you. Here's a question, quote, All the contracts should be notarized. I mean, lease contracts and service agreements. Well, we did cover that and said the most relevant ones.
Yes, not a lot of them, but the most important contracts of your operation, we suggest you at least ratify them or notarize them. It's a suggestion, okay?
Yes, the 80 to 20 rule might be applicable. 80% of your tax deductible concepts on your P&L are based on situations that depend on a contract, then there's your answer. Yes, go ahead and authorize. If we're talking about less representative transactions backed up by a contract, then you might gamble in that situation.
Yes.
Well, I think we can call it a day. There are no more questions, but like Carlos said, we keep in touch if you wish to deliver a new question to both our emails, and we'll be more than happy to take care of that for you. We thank you very much again. For those of you who have a holiday today, we doubly thank you for making the time in joining us today. And we would like to keep on doing business to deserve your trust. Carlos and myself are very honored to make this type of exercise. And should you wish to come over with some other particular situations or other subjects, we can try it again if you like this one.
Thank you very much.
We say goodbye for now. Thank you.